Yeah. To my detriment, I've always been one of those people that is unafraid to take risks. And
Mm.
as you know, that doesn't always work out, but I don't mind making a few mistakes to learn some lessons along the way.
Well, you'll appreciate this. Then I was talking to Mariano Rivera, and he said, listen, anyone that you speak to, anytime you get the chance, spread this for me. He says, success and failure, they go hand in hand. So if you don't take the risks, you know, how do you know what you're capable of in life also,
Yeah.
right?
I think it's just the way people are wired. I don't know that you can teach somebody to have that kind of mindset. You would know better than me probably, but I find like you're either wired inherently to be able to do that, and or you're not. I think there's just a lot of people that I know, and great people and successful people, but you know, they need predictability at
Yeah.
all times to be comfortable.
It's funny. It's so funny you say it. It's amazing how like when you read things or you're you know, that all of a sudden things come full circle and real. I was just peeking through a book. A guy told me, hey, you know, read through this Rich Dad, Poor Dad book. And he talks about this whole quadrant where you have employees who want nothing but security and the benefits. And then you have the small business owner, then you have the business owner, and then you have the investor.
Mm-hmm.
And there are people that they just want to live in this box and they want to be as safe as possible. And that gives them a feeling that they can't get anywhere else.
Yep. No,
So,
it is limiting to a large degree. I guess it
yeah,
depends on what you want out of life, right? Some people don't. Some people set their sights higher than others, and you know, there's a lot of people that want to always evolve. They always want to learn. They want to grow. They want to see how far they can go,
yep,
and whatever their profession is, or their hobbies, or whatever their passions are. And you know, I like surrounding myself with people like that.
totally, 100%. Were you always like that? Like when you go back, I love to talk about when somebody's a young kid and a young man, where their head was at. You know, were you always thinking about, were you the kid with the lemonade stand or trying to always do
Yeah,
something?
I was always pretty entrepreneurial. Uh, Not always maybe the right way. I was like one of these kids, and you know, when I was 6, 7 years old, that was flipping baseball cards and getting them confiscated by the nuns, and you know, I was one of those kids. But yeah, I was always interested in you could say small business and coming up with creative ways to either learn or make money, or I mean, just develop as a person. I was as a small kid, I was very introverted, but that changed really fast.
Yeah. I always say if you're an introverted kid, you're just strategizing for what you're going to do later.
That's right. One of those kids sitting there in the corner, and you know he's thinking about something, and you're not sure if you should be worried.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Did you grow up in Florida or up north?
No, I'm from New York. I grew up in Manhattan. All my
Okay.
family's still there on the Lower East Side mostly. And about somewhere mid childhood, I got transplanted to Long Island.
Oh,
And
that's where I grew up.
yeah, well, back then it was like considered the country, you know, if you could
Yeah,
believe that. No one would believe that if they went to Long Island now for the first time because it's so congested everywhere. But
everywhere.
back then, I mean, we literally had a house built on a dirt road, and so my childhood, you know, had that juxtaposition of, you know, kind of growing up in the city. All my family was in the city, but then a large part was in the, you know, in the quote unquote country. So it had that element to it. But in a way, that kind of helped me, I think, you know, understand people that came from, you know, different types of upbringings. You know, I wasn't really locked into just growing up one way with one mindset, you know, based on my, you know, my town or my city or anything like that.
Yeah, no, that's cool. Hey, there's a lot of talent that comes off of Long Island.
That's for sure. And in every walk of life,
Yeah.
100%.
I always say part of the reason behind that is that they want to get off the island.
Yeah, you could definitely make that case. And, you know, maybe now more than ever, it's, like I said, it's just gotten so congested over time. And, you know, New York City's always been like that, you know, kind of shiny, I want to say shiny toy, but it's always kind of dangling in the background, depending on where you are on the expressway. You can always see the skyline.
Yep.
And, you know, it's always like kind of beckoning, you know, it's almost like if you don't try that, you're missing something.
Totally, 100%. I'm with you on that. We all had that dream of making it in the city, and what it's like this. When you're on Long Island, now for me, I grew up out by Port Jeff, so I was a little further out. It's like, so actually in the town Mount Sinai, you may know where that is.
Of course, absolutely, yeah.
Yeah. So you're always thinking like, hey, I'm in this small town, and then you see this city where you got Broadway and you have big business, and it keeps you excited, keeps you hungry.
Yeah, well, after college, I moved right back to Manhattan, and that's where I had started my career. So I was back there during one of the many financial booms. We don't have to say what years, but those were good times.
That's cool. So now you're sort of in a hybrid between sports and finance. Mm-hmm. But did you always love sports? Were you an athlete yourself?
I'll answer the second question first. I was always a wannabe athlete.
Okay.
I was one of these kids that would play sports every day, whether it was stickball in the street or football in a yard or basketball in my driveway. Every day I was playing sports, watching sports, reading about sports. So, I mean, from a very young age, I wasn't like I was always small. I mean, right now can't tell I'm average height, but growing up, I was always like the smallest kid in school. So you look back at my communion pictures, my confirmation pictures, I was always the first kid in line, and they always did that by like height order. So my sports abilities were somewhat curtailed, but I always enjoyed playing. I got interested. I kind of tell the story from time to time. I had a cousin that was 1 year older than me, and he was hardcore into sports, like probably from like the time he could walk. And I was always like kind of lagging behind in that regard. And the first baseball game I ever went to was a bat day at Yankee Stadium. I was very young. So it was a
big day. That's a huge day at Yankee Stadium.
Well, I'm going to tell you how old, this will tell you how old I am in general. When they were giving out the bats, my cousin got a Horace Clark and I got a Mickey Mantle.
Wow.
And he to throw the tantrum of all tantrums on the floor of the Yankee Stadium concourse because he wanted the Mickey Mantle bat. And I didn't care because I didn't even know who Mickey Mantle was. So I handed him my bat, which, helped de-escalate the situation. But I held on to that Horace Clark bat. I must have had that till I was like 30 years old. And,
wow. That's amazing.
You move enough times in your life, you kind of lose some of these things along the way.
Oh, yeah.
But that was kind of the genesis. I started paying a lot more attention to sports. I had an uncle that used to call me Roberto Clemente, and then I didn't know what that was. And he'd always say, do you know who that is? I would say no. And then one day I kind of took the onus was on me to kind of figure out who Roberto Clemente was. And I pat myself on the back because this was pre-internet, obviously. And I'm not even sure I could read back then, but I was resourceful enough to figure out, this was a very prominent outfielder with the Pittsburgh Pirates at the time. And one day he called me Roberto Clemente. I told him exactly who Roberto Clemente was. He was very impressed. And, from there, I would say, my interest has never really waned.
Wow. What's just so interesting about that, as you say, Roberto Clemente, I have a memory of the first book I ever read cover to cover. I was a big book cheater, flipping through a couple pages, pass a few.
Yeah.
Roberto Clemente biography was the first book I ever read I was reading it on the school bus. That's a small world. Pretty amazing guy.
Yeah. They, because now we don't have live sports. I think it was like MLB Network about a week ago was showing the 1971 World Series. And that was, one of his, I think he was MVP either of the league or the World Series that year. And just watching it was just like, I don't remember watching it back then, but it was just so nostalgic to see these players that like I read about, like you.
Yeah.
And them on TV and kind of performing live at the time. I was riveted. It was like I was watching it for the first time.
I feel like back then too, players were, I want to say even more special because I felt like even myself growing up on Long Island, I would say I never even saw a professional athlete, outside of like Bobby Nystrom or guys on the Islanders that, would kind of hang around town. You never saw anybody. So it was like a really big deal,
Yeah.
But so you started Whitecap Sports. Well, I know there's going to be a lot of different folks listening to this that may not know exactly what you do. So I would love for you to tell us, what it is that you do on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah. I mean, I always tell people, I think I have the best elevator pitch known to man. So, that elevator pitch where you're supposed to, in like a couple seconds, get somebody's attention, otherwise they'll walk away. And my elevator pitch is when somebody has asked me about this in an elevator, not once, but twice. I just say I buy and sell pro sports teams. And it never doesn't get the required response. Nobody ever says, oh, I know another guy that does that. Or, nobody's ever dismissive. It's always like exactly what you want. People say, wait, what? Explain that again. They want more information, which is what you want, right? Any business you're in, when you tell someone what you do, you want them to be more inquisitive. You want them to ask for more information. So, that's obviously a very brief way to explain what we do, but that's the essence of it. Whitecap Sports is in the business of putting investors into sports-related opportunities. And by and large, that means team ownership. Okay. So when I had started in this industry years ago, before I started Whitecap, I had done this for other companies, and it was mostly minor league sports. I did a lot of work in minor league baseball, minor league hockey, things of that nature. And then over time, as I became more experienced, got exposed to different opportunities, the deals started getting a little more interesting. And we're not scaled like a large investment bank. We're not chasing down, these $2-3 billion acquisitions. It's just not our sweet spot. But we are heavily involved in things like limited partnerships in major league teams. So for instance, they wants to own a 2% stake in an NBA team or 5% stake in a major league baseball team. We've done a lot of those in the past few years.
So I get in doing that, you've got a chance to meet some really interesting people as well.
For sure. Yes. Yeah, but I get asked that sometimes because people presume, well, if you're dealing with millionaires and billionaires, which primarily we do, they must be eccentric, they must be difficult to deal with, they must be very demanding. And I would say no more so than the average person, quite honestly. I find, you can get somebody just in any walk of life that's difficult to deal with, right? Or that's unprofessional, or that's curt. I find with the people that we talk to, really the same principles always, kind of hold. If you carry yourself professionally, if you're, established that you could provide value, if your communication is, always done properly and promptly, you will immediately gain credibility and respect. And given that, we are the gatekeeper for some of these opportunities that they do want to know more about, I find that building those relationships is not particularly difficult as long as you adhere to those values.
Yeah, values and the fundamentals of just good, solid business and life, really. Those I find are becoming somewhat hard to come by. So when you possess those traits, people say, hey, he's solid.
Well, not only that, Dana, I think some of this is a lost art, because everybody's just so, I think, defaults to the quick communication and the abbreviations and the emojis and everything is just so, very truncated that when somebody sees a fully formed sentence or a level of politeness or professionalism or, somebody being a little more descriptive when they're trying to get a point across, I don't find, I think a lot of people maybe in my generation or your generation still do that prolifically, but I don't necessarily find that with a lot of other people that are maybe just entering the business world. It's probably not even their fault. I just don't think it's ever been, ingrained in them how important that is.
Yeah. It takes time. And I think what I see a lot of, I call them sort of business hackers that are advertising on the social channels about everything's quick, everything's fast transacting. And, to your point, like everything, some of the most special moments of our life are the positive interactions and the moments that we get to spend some time with people, get to know who they are, what they're about. And that's really, I believe, how great business is done.
Yeah, I tell my guys all the time, especially because of the business we're in, it's not highly transactional, right? So we have all the time in the world to build relationships.
Yeah.
And that at the end of the day is really what matters most. There's no quick hits. We're not stockbrokers. We're not trying to sell somebody something in 30 seconds. There's no impulse acquisitions. You have to really build up your credibility. You have to be able to really demonstrate a value proposition. And then you have to have a really good understanding of the process and how to get somebody, from the beginning to the end. And that takes time. And the beauty of that is it fosters a lot of communication and a lot of interaction with clients, prospects, and it allows you to build those relationships if you want to. We still find sometimes people default mostly to email, and I always, I kind of sometimes get a little frustrated myself, and I'm like, don't be afraid to pick up the phone. We're not in a cold calling business per se, but that doesn't mean you can't pick up the phone if you're unsure of something, or if you just want to say hello or check on something. I mean, it doesn't all have to be done via email.
Yeah. I love that. That's cool. So for you, how do you guys go about finding these opportunities? Is there a lot of searching, or is it now at the point in your career where a lot of things are just coming to you?
Yeah, it depends. I would say, to your last point, we've been real fortunate over the last year or so, particularly where, opportunities have just come to us. We had I don't want to get into too much of the details here. Yeah. I got a call about a year ago, just out of the blue. And it was from somebody, and you could tell they were struggling with the words because they didn't want to over disclose anything. But the long and short of it is, they were an owner of a small piece of a Major League Baseball team, and they knew a very famous basketball player who owned part of an NBA team, and they kind of were figuring out, like, they were trying to figure out how to do that. How do I sell my piece of my baseball team? And it just so happens I had done a small deal with that basketball team not that long previously. And so the basketball player basically said, hey, call this guy, gave him my information. And that opened up, a whole slew of opportunities, because we got that first transaction done. And then that led us to another, dozen or so of a similar nature. So that voicemail, sorry for being so cryptic about it, but that voicemail is on my phone and stored in probably 2 or 3 other cloud locations, because I'll never, ever want to get rid of it.
Yeah, no, that's awesome, man. Do you find that, because you're in such we'll call it an affluent business, it has to be, you're dealing with some pretty big players that, I'm thinking about somebody that's saying, hey, I'd like to start a business, maybe not selling pro sports teams, but that caters to more of an upper echelon like that. Do you find that, in building, it's a slower build because it's so relationship driven, as opposed to not just, you can't just do the cold call thing?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, it would be I've been doing this for 12 plus years, and I'd be lying if I said out of the gate I was achieving successful results. I mean, it was a process for me personally. There was a learning curve. These deals all take time. None of these transactions are done in a couple weeks, or a lot of times not even in a couple months. So the key is to really, get a lot of irons in the fire and have patience. The patience is probably the most important thing. If somebody wanted to be in this business, let's say they were listening to this podcast and they say tomorrow, hey, I'm going to go do that. It just doesn't work that way. I mean, you have to build the relationships. You have to, in most cases, you have to also get licensed, because a lot of what we do are considered securities deals. You have to get licensed with FINRA. It's not like, although there are companies that do this, you can't really just stick a shingle outside your door and say, hey, I'm buying and selling pro sports teams for people. It just doesn't work that way.
Yeah.
It's a very long process. And not to discourage people from getting involved in the business, one of the things I love, when I'm trying to grow my company, is bringing people in that have these long-term aspirations and mentoring them and giving them the tools to succeed and the roadmap, so that, their career trajectory can benefit from mine, and in many cases be a lot shorter. So whereas, my playbook took maybe 12, 13 years to get to where I am, I'm fairly certain if I had the right person to mentor, I could probably get them there in 2 to 3 years, somewhere in that time frame.
So how did you deal with the sort of, I mean, I think a lot of entrepreneurs deal with this, that the frustration of those early years of like, hey, I have these big dreams. I have this big aspiration. I know I've done it for somebody else in the past. Now I'm doing it for myself. Some of these deals are slow to come through, and, you have a real life that you have to attend to as well, financially. And, like how did you, I love taking entrepreneurs back in time to those days that were probably pretty painful yet exciting. How did you manage your headspace during those periods?
Yeah, it's not easy, because there's so many challenges along the way. And if you're not strong of mind, you'll doubt yourself. You'll constantly be reevaluating whether you've made the right decision, whether you're in the right place. Is it worth the time and effort you're putting in? I'm of the mindset as it's good to have long-term goals. It's good to say, hey, in 5 years and 10 years, I want to be here. But you really can't do that at the expense of the short-term goals. So I think I learned throughout that time that if I can at least hit my short-term goals, I could be confident that over time I will hit my long-term goals. So instead of having a goal for 5 years out and then struggling for the first X number of months or years, I started setting monthly goals, weekly goals, daily goals, which I still do to this day. The beautiful thing about setting a daily goal or even an hourly goal is you give yourself a chance to achieve success by hitting the goal.
Yeah.
So your mindset becomes a lot more solid if you see yourself as somebody who's achieving goals on a regular basis. So by setting shorter term goals and hitting those goals, I think your confidence will certainly grow, and you'll be less likely to feel like you're veering off your desired path. You'll feel more like you're on your path because you're hitting all your marks.
I love that, man. That's awesome. So I got to ask you these simple questions, but like, what would an example of an hourly goal look like? I have to make this phone call this hour?
Yeah. I mean, it really could run the gamut. It could be number of calls you want to make. It could be a number of outreaches you want to send. There could be a deal we're working on and we want to go find, 10 really solid prospects for that in the next hour. And then maybe that takes a certain amount of diligence and research and focus to do that. It could be just task related goals. It could be, you could have an email box with, dozens of unread messages because you are doing other things that are also important. So maybe over the next half hour, you make a goal saying, I'm going to get all of these responded to. Again, it could be anything, but the main point is you set that up as your measurement for success. You hit it, you will feel successful.
Yeah. You know what I love about that? I feel like a competitive person would be salivating right now hearing this because I got to get this done in this hour. So it's, the patience needed to achieve that sort of long range goal. A lot of people get frustrated, they don't have the patience for it, but I love that hour. I actually haven't even heard of an hourly goal, but I love that. And I could see it really creating and generating a lot of momentum, and it doesn't leave you sort of spinning your wheels too long because it's a straight action strategy.
Yeah. Well, I find if you feel like your longer term goals are becoming unattainable, you will lose your momentum, you'll lose your enthusiasm, you'll lose your desire, and you will almost inevitably flame out and quote unquote fail. So you need those minor successes along the way to stay energized.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic. I love that. I feel like I'm spinning a little bit, but I always like to address these things. I know we all deal with different things in different ways and at different times, but there are these sort of at times limiting beliefs that we get or we question and we doubt ourselves. No, it's a two-part question, but one is, what are some of the like reoccurring themes that you may have or have currently had, and then what do you do to overcome them?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think we might have just covered it though, because really that would be it. Along the way, some of my doubts if they occurred were around, am I on the right track?
Yeah.
Okay. Am I going to be able to hit my goals? Because we're not highly transactional, it's not like every day we can set an income goal. We can't even set an income goal by the month. So you really have to stick with activity goals. And so to your question about like, where have we had doubt or, gotten involved with, like, maybe struggled from time to time, I think it's that. I think it's, focusing more on, hey, I need to make this amount of money, to pay bills or to go make an acquisition or wherever you want to allocate your funds, and focusing less on what the steps are that will get you there. Because there's really, like almost every other business, there's no shortcuts. You could get lucky, but it's like getting hit by a lightning. It has occurred, I've seen it, but you can't sit there and wait for it. You really have to make it happen. I mean, we're very much in this business self-starters. And I tell people, I would say at least several times a week, I mention this to people, that we are not in a hard job. This is not a difficult job as far as the day-to-day, what has to be done, the blocking and tackling, so to speak. What is difficult, and the reason everyone doesn't succeed, is the difficult part is staying organized, staying consistent, okay, and being able to manage your own time. And I think a lot of people, when you say that, they nod their heads and they say, oh yeah, I can do that, until they can't. And they might be able to do that for a day or two, but can you do that? Can you sustain that over weeks, months, years? That's the hard part of this job, and a lot of other jobs, is building a career through persistence and consistency, and not just waiting for the quick hits to make you feel better.
Yeah, it's that success over time mentality. And I always say, even in professional sports, that's what makes the great athletes great. The ability to be consistent, doing simple things day in and day out. When you meet some of these guys, you're like, wait, that's what he does to be great? And it's like, well, he has talent, but it's that every day they could show up with greater consistency than anybody else.
Right. Well, look at somebody in baseball that maybe is a great hitter, but they're having a bad month, right? They're in a slump. What do they usually do? They don't usually pout about it. They go back into the cage. They work with their hitting instructor. Maybe they change their workout regimen. Maybe they start getting more sleep.
Yeah.
Whatever the case may be. But, they go back to the basics. They're not usually, too proud to go back to the basics and just kind of, build themselves back up until they are more consistent in their approach and their results. So it's not that much different in business.
Yeah. So you would say that a lot of, when you analyze success, and even talking to the people that you work with, a lot of it comes down to just these consistent day-to-day habits.
Absolutely. I think everyone largely innately has the ability to do things far above and beyond what they're doing on a day-to-day basis. They use the cliche of potential, but I think everybody has, almost unlimited potential. What stops certain people from achieving it is either A, they don't believe they have the potential, they're limiting themselves, or they're not consistently building towards, their own personal growth.
Yeah. How do you feel about vision? Like, are you a big vision guy? Like somebody that, like, you sort of have your sights even right now on where Whitecap is going and where we're heading, and like how into that are you?
I would think you have to have some vision. I would think you definitely always have to be cognizant of what the big picture is, and where are you going, where's your company headed, where's your industry headed, where are you personally going, from a development standpoint. So I think all of that falls under the umbrella of vision, right? So I think you can't be absent of that. But if you ask me personally, I focus more on the here and now and what has to be done today, and where our team has to be day to day, week to week, month to month. Are we doing things right? I always say it's better to do things right than do it fast. So process and, just internally educating yourself and making sure you're the best you could be and you have the knowledge you need to be successful. I think that all can be done in more of a short-term basis. But at the same time, we're not absent of vision, but we don't have a crystal ball either. So you asked somebody 5 years ago, where would you be in 5 years? They probably would have got the answer wrong.
Exactly.
Especially this year.
No, totally. Yeah. I think everybody's sort of twisted a bit, but, I always say too, with great opposition comes great opportunity.
Correct.
So we don't know what's coming, but so, I love, talking about the business, and then I always like to spin it back to the leader of the shop, as it relates to your personal development and your own personal habits and routines. You know, what do you do to keep yourself sort of focused and solid, you know, physically, mentally on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah, and I think all of that is important. I think you always need to be growing emotionally, physically, intellectually, and I try to incorporate that on a daily basis to how I approach everything. So whether that's getting up early and exercising, reading, I'm a huge reader, especially in the morning.
Mm.
I think we can always learn more, of course. So every day I'm either reading, not as much in world events because I don't know where to get the news from anymore. um, when it comes to my industry, there's a lot of different resources that are, updated on a daily basis. And as far as what's going on in the sports world or the sports business world. So I'm always cognizant to stay up to date on that. So I spend a lot of time on that. I spend a lot of time reading just in general, outside of my industry. And I even spend time on some of the other, whether you want to call it soft skills or emotional intelligence. I read a lot in those subjects as well, because if you're going to be a leader and you're going to manage people and you want to inspire people to be their best, you can't just necessarily just, give them a thumbs up and say, good luck.
Yeah.
I mean, try to give them direction, give them guidance, and give them, the tools they need to be successful.
I love that. So you're the kind of, I always say you're the kind of leader that you like to get in the ring with your people, so spar with them a little bit.
I do.
Feel them, yeah.
Yeah, for better or worse. I don't know if that's how they would like it, but I think that's integral to any team's success. I think people also need to know that the person who's leading them or who's running their company is not afraid to do the work that they're doing. Like, I wouldn't ask someone to do something that I would not do.
Yeah.
Okay. Or that I haven't done a million times already. So I think that's also important, that we don't have the haves and the have-nots. We are all skilled in various aspects of our business.
Yeah. So with that too, because there's a lot of varying thoughts on this. I'm really good at these things, so therefore this is what I'm going to focus on. And I only focus on my strengths. I don't really focus on my weaknesses. What's your thought in leading an organization, as it relates to that?
Well, I think you should maximize people's strengths, right? Because people who have, certain abilities that they do things better than others, I think it would be foolish not to capitalize that and use that to the benefit of the business. At the same time, I think people will not grow if they don't challenge themselves and they don't further develop their weaknesses. Those weaknesses turn into Achilles heels, and they could be debilitating, depending on where they are in their career. A weakness that might not hurt them at Whitecap Sports might completely crush them at another company or in another industry. So I try to help people recognize, where they're strong, where they're weak, and I do try to challenge them to develop their weaknesses. I wouldn't necessarily take their weaknesses and put that, front and center and make them sink or swim as a result, but I do encourage them to always be developing.
Yeah, no, that's great. And for you as the, I would say again, as the leader of this organization, how do you manage to not want to do everything? I know a lot of leaders they got to be in on it, or they feel, that pressure. How do you manage that?
I'm not sure I do. I do try. And I know that, the key is, of course, to empower other people to do work and to be successful and to learn and grow and to contribute to the business. It is hard if you've been doing it much longer than everyone else not to look at something and then immediately want to dive in and fix it or do it differently or faster or better. But I do remind myself that is in the long run counterproductive to growing, the staff and the company. So I just, the answer to that question is I usually catch myself, kind of midstream, and then I take a step back and I tell people, if you need me, I'm here 100%. Even if it's if it's a question you think I'm going to tell you should know the answer to, I might tell you should know the answer to it, but I'm still going to answer it for you or show you how to get the answer. So, I always want to foster collaboration. and interaction with everybody, and just strive to have that type of communication system inside the company.
That's good. I do a lot of writing about the different styles of leadership, and I say, most of us were raised, in our age group, we're raised in more of a dictator style of leadership. You do this, you do what I say, and if you don't, you're out. Where today, it has to be much more of a collaborative leadership style for people to feel valued and, that they're a part of this whole thing.
Agree, 100%.
Yeah, so I appreciate you using that word. And, so this has been definitely a crazy year for sports so far. How do you see maybe what's gone on affecting the value of teams, or not much?
I don't think it's going to, presuming that we're in a 1 year, kind of an outlier period, or, blip on the screen, I don't think the long-term prognosis is really any different. There are a lot of value shoppers, buyers out there that I think mistakenly presume that, there's things in the discount bin or being fire saled. That's just simply not the case. And honestly, I would say I thought that might be the case myself when this all started evolving. I said, well, there might be a lot of opportunities where sellers, whether they, got dinged in the market or their own businesses are on the shelf, they might be looking for liquidity. I have largely found that not to be the case, not in any disproportionate amount to normal.
Got it.
So I don't think, I think with team values, they'll continue to rise. You see leagues even today, or as recently as this week, are already re-upping on media rights deals that are enormous and that will underpin their future value. And not to mention that you have, the whole specter of sports gaming and sports betting that's coming like a tidal wave.
Yeah.
And that's going to be an unavoidable situation. But, at the same time, it'll create a number of ancillary revenue streams that don't exist today. And, again, that will also in turn boost media rights, which then boost future values.
Yeah. You can definitely see that changing the whole landscape of sports.
Yeah. Now, if teams didn't play in 2021 or 22, it's a whole different story. But there's no indication that what we're going through is not going to be resolved, by next year's seasons across the board.
Could you see there being like sort of in-game from your seat type gambling going on in stadiums?
100%. Yes,
yeah.
100%. I
Okay.
totally, whether you're in your seat at the game or on your couch watching on TV, there will be a way for you to integrate with a gaming platform that's in all likelihood sponsored by the league and in turn by the team, and they'll have partnerships with all these platforms that'll enable you to engage that way. I'm not saying that's a good or a bad thing for people in general, but it's coming, it's unavoidable. And you will have access not just to betting on games, but you'll have access to live betting, which is out there today, where you could be sitting in a seat and a batter comes to the plate and you have an option. Is he going to hit a home run? Is he going to strike out? Is he going to ground out? Is he going to walk? And everything will have different odds. And people will be, I think, again, this could work to somebody's detriment, but people will be engaged for sure.
Yeah, let's hope they do some winning so they could afford to buy a seat at the next game.
That's right. That's right.
It's funny because I have my own theories on this, but I've always thought that this sort of increased focus on analytics and data acquisition, use baseball as an example, is basically to set up gambling in some ways.
You're 100% right. We did a consulting assignment about a year ago with a company that, for all intents and purposes, was a sports betting, gaming organization. And I learned on the very first call that is not really what it is. The CEO of the company, the first thing he said is, we're really not a gaming company, we're a data company. And that was really where the value of the company resided. It was in their data, in their analytics, not as much as giving people an opportunity to bet on games.
Yeah. It's crazy. I mean, you think about the patience needed in your business. How about a business like that it has to kind of wait it out to see where where this thing's going to go,
Not only that, and they have to get approval, across all it's state by state. So in New Jersey, you have a lot more opportunity to engage that way than you would in Florida, where where we are, I don't even think it's on the docket to be voted on. It maybe it is, but it certainly is not. It's certainly not in existence in probably half the states.
Yeah, wow, it's wild, man. It's gonna change a lot of things.
It certainly will.
That's for sure. So I have one more question for you. I always ask this at the end of every show is the word champion. I call this the Becoming a Champion show. I think we're all on a journey to become our champion self and become better and better. But what does that word mean to you?
That's a really good question. I don't look at a champion as necessarily being the best in an industry or the team. Of course, you can get coined the champion if you're a basketball team, you win the title, you're champions, of course.
Yeah.
But most of us are not in that position. Most of us don't have the luxury or the ability to achieve that kind of championship success in professional sports. So I look at it a little differently, and I look at it from a company and a business perspective. And to me, a champion is somebody who is working and achieving, their maximum potential. And if their company is doing the most that they can do for their clients and achieving results, and they're building relationships, I would consider that a champion success story in and of itself. So again, back to what we were talking about earlier about long-term versus short-term goals. Same thing with champions. Like, I'm never going to be a World Series winner, or I'm never going to win the Stanley Cup, but I could set milestones in my own business that I feel will get me to the pinnacle of where I could be.
Yeah, no, I love that. Yeah, it's funny because every person that I ask that question to, the answers are so aligned and so similar. The one thing no one ever says is about acquisition of something or some things.
Right.
And even athletes I brought on don't even say it's about a ring. Mm-hmm. So it's wild, but it's cool. So no, that's awesome. I appreciate it.